Welcome back to the Zeitcast. My name is Jonathan Martin. I'm calling this out of the gate. This is easily, I know it will be one of the most meaningful conversations like this I've had. I'm going to go ahead and call it. It's going to be people's favorite because, Lauren, this is the effect that you have on people. Let me humiliate you for just a moment. So, Lauren Barnett, currently Chief of Staff, Interim Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the Expectations Project, which I adore. We'll say a lot about that. But where I have to start here, Lauren, is that, I don't know who I've had on. There aren't a lot of guests that I have here who've where we have this level of history. Do you know that when I was your youth pastor, I was 25 years old?
Which is incredible.
I mean, that's wild.
You weren't just the youth pastor either. You were the precursor to my 15-year marriage. Just celebrated 15 years.
Oh, that's amazing.
So my spouse and I met at your youth group.
Unbelievable. See, a lot of people met in that youth group.
A lot of people met in that youth group.
As it seems to be known, is it known to the world as Steph Curry's youth group? Were y'all the same age exactly? Was that the exact same time?
Same exact overlapping time. Stefan is a year younger than me.
Okay.
Aisha, I believe, is also a year younger than me. And we were just like, hey, you're going to be, a global superstar one day. And I'm going to be advocating for people and their rights.
Yes. You and me both. It's kind of, and Lauren, it's it really is. This was true even then. Like I say these things to you, and I think that's from my heart and the kind of stuff I would say behind your back too. I never, as a student, it's just like you were just such a personification. And I don't know, I've told you before how life-saving and sanity restoring it's been for me, the things that you'll say kindly, because it was a different time and era and place. And the fact that you've seen more, I don't know, some continuity as opposed to discontinuity, because, we're all on a journey, but even then, the kinds of things that you cared about and the kinds of people that you cared about, and just seeing the genesis of kind of where you started then. It's also, by the way, the parallel track stuff is just wild, because then Lauren, after youth group, then goes to Gardner-Webb University.
Yep.
Where I went for undergrad, and Lauren became the face of Gardner to an extent that I don't know how to explain to people, because you really got the sense that Gardner-Webb only had one student.
One brown little student that you could hang out with if you just enroll. I was on the billboards, in the catalog, on the website, and repeatedly charged with representing Gardner-Webb. I still to this day love Gardner-Webb so deeply, and am so thankful for my time there, because I think it's interesting just how many of us came through these private Christian institutions just radicalized, burgeoning social consciousness. We are on fire, ready to change everything. And these institutions are not chartered to do that. And they are not expecting that. And here they are, just, it happened.
That's so interesting, Lauren, because my experience too is that with nothing but fond things to say about Gardner-Webb is I don't recall any of the stuff being in the water then. Or anything that I heard I was in a class or a professor said this, and was like, oh, that started this journey. It seemed pretty incidental in that way. And yet, I don't know. It's just interesting then that we've kind of, because, and in some ways I look back now and it's hilarious to think when I was 25, especially even trying to talk about, I don't know, empire or something, where it's I'm grateful for the spirit-led journey, but also what did I know?
It was so raw. It was just coming really out. It was coming out of the wilderness. It was locusts and honey energy. John the Baptist. We were all figuring it out together. We were whoa, wait a second. There's something going on.
Yes.
And it was a really fascinating time, especially discovering my Blackness in these, predominantly white spaces. And
those were predominantly white spaces, Lauren?
Oh yeah. You wouldn't be able to tell from the billboards, but they were.
Right. That's amazing.
And so, I had these like little luminaries and,
Yeah.
coming through that education process, and they were kind of, nurturing me on. And I just look back and I'm like, wow, you are really taking one for the team for a lot of time.
We have so much I want to get to, but I have to dig in on this question for a second, Lauren. This thing of like when you talk about really discovering your identity and blackness. So how did that happen within those cultural spaces? Like what was the catalyst
I mean, it's
for
the
you?
same thing with you and Sister Margaret.
Mm,
You have these people who kind of nurture the seed. It's already there. It wants to grow. It's trying to push through the soil. And it just needs a little water here and there, a little
yeah.
affirmation here and there. And there were many people throughout my journey who did that nurturing work,
Mm,
some consciously, some subconsciously, and others just because it seemed obvious, like yourself. You were never curious about the fact that blackness and, white supremacy and all of these things had this, I guess, animosity that was deeply seated. You just saw something was
mm,
wrong and
yeah.
you wanted to make it right. And then that
Mm,
led you on the journey. And I was following your journey, and I was, watching you get in trouble and
mm-hmm,
watching
mm-hmm,
people around me get in trouble, and still undeterred because,
mm,
it was who we had to grow up and become.
mm,
And I think that that's really how it happens. It
yeah.
is sweet, affirming relationships that allow you to be yourself, allow you to explore, allow you to be uncertain, allow
Yeah.
you to not know.
Yeah.
Like
I
you
so
did.
I love that so much, Lauren. And it's fun even for you to say because I never talk about this or rarely talk about this in my own journey simply because I don't want to sound like self-referential or something, but it's kind of like we we did get into trouble. Like we actually did.
Yeah, we actually did.
We actually did
Like
get in
you
trouble for these
actually
things,
did.
It's sort of like, yeah, it's kind of like not in a way to like, it's just being a martyr. So it's more like, but yeah, it's kind of like there are consequences for being, which is part of what's been. And why I say that so often to you, Lauren, when we do talk, like the way that you give me so much courage to want to do and say all the things, because it's like, I don't know, just when you see uh, someone kind of coming up behind you in that way that just like, oh, fiercer, articulates, gets grasp this on levels that I never could, and is willing to take the hits and stuff. That's the kind of stuff that just really does make me want to keep going. And I'm always so grateful for that.
Well, you are an Aries, so
Yeah,
have you gotten into astrology, by the
not
way?
really, no.
Okay, when you're ready.
I have been told a few times that the Aries stuff is that the Aries is strong in this
Aries is
way.
strong.
So.
And we're a twin flame. I'm also an Aries. It was just a matter
Yes.
of the match striking.
Yes. So the cosmic was conspiring, the cosmos and the Lord,
Absolutely.
and all kinds of like. Now, specifically because I can't remember how it happened first. Well, actually, I think it might have been William Matthews. Probably was William Matthews. Definitely one of my friends that first connected me to the Expectations Project and ended up because that was a memorable trip. Just getting to go
Mm.
and lobby and all the things that I just saw and felt and heard. That was probably, I'm thinking 2016 or 17. How did you get connected to this really crucial work that just is an unbelievable fit, by the
Oh
way?
my gosh. Expectations Project. I've been the chief of staff there since February this year, 2024. And just a little bit of background about the organization. The Expectations Project mobilizes people of faith to envision and demand better for marginalized children. We're a small team that works hard on the national level to influence narrative shift in terms of what people of faith are capable of doing and in terms of how they can impact systems. We also work locally to nurture grassroots movements and social change related to policy. And I got involved with the Expectations Project when Zakia and Christina Cleveland put out a
Mm,
call for folks who were interested in doing deep social change work from a faith lens and wanted to be in a cohorted environment. And so I connected with Zakia then, and I started really supporting her work as president of the Expectations Project when she transitioned over into that role from being the advocacy VP in probably 2020 when I was at Habitat and I was really churning up some stuff with people of faith in Wake County in North Carolina. And I wanted to kind of cross-pollinate, and she wanted to get that institutional insight into how to sustain a movement like housing and transfer that over to education. So I was consulting for her, and we just had a great time. We were finding all kinds of points of overlap. We were really enthusiastic about the knowledge transfer, who we were meeting, how we were coming across new visions. And it seemed like a really cool opportunity, especially in the time for public education right here and right now, how salient and how important it is to dig in, hold the line for public education, minority children in public education, how important it is for people of faith. We're at a critical juncture as far as Christian nationalism goes. So I joined that team full time from doing my advocacy jobs locally to head up some of the special projects and other kinds of cool work going on at the org.
Just extraordinary. And I have to ask, Lauren, when you talk about especially this work that you do in public education, what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that feel like in this particular cultural moment? Because what a moment.
What a moment. You know, I feel so strongly about public education, despite having grown up in Christian schools and parochial schools, because I realize how strong the Christian evangelical propaganda is, really limiting the potential of so many marginalized kids who rely on public schools. And having committed to being a public school mom when our kids were coming up and, you know, still in it strong with the public schools, it has not been easy. There's been a lot to confront on a deeply personal level, on an emotional level, on a spiritual level about the access for educational attainment for everybody. What does that mean to me? How do I translate my experience here? And it turns out I have a lot to say and I have a lot to contribute, even though I don't come from this long legacy of teachers or public education champions like many of these people in my ecosystem do. I have a lens of, hey, Christians can make a difference, and we're not just here to be moms for liberty or, you know, parents' rights or voucher goblins. We can do other stuff. So it's been great.
That's so powerful. It is interesting, Lauren. I hadn't really thought about it that way in terms of you not growing up in context of public education. Because, you know, the interesting thing for me is that if I were to give the shortest possible version of my testimony, I think it's for me been, okay, so obviously everything that I heard about Jesus, the gospel, this fundamental orientation around the Spirit, all that took and is in my bones and will be there forever. But I really felt like it's when I made the leap from a private Christian school in Charlotte in 7th grade to Wilson Middle and then West Mecklenburg High School that radicalized me, simply because it's like the Spirit and gospel stuff took, but the real stories of people around me kind of coming into confrontation with what I'd heard about their stories, that's the thing that changed my life.
So it gave you access to social classes and races and ethnicities you wouldn't have had access to otherwise.
That's right.
And that's the interesting nuance about this conversation, is that what are we really trying to do here in public education? Are we trying to level set so everybody can, you know, get a great job? Yes, but there's also this social aspect of public education that has to be vigorously defended. And so that, I think, is just so powerful. And coming into this as a mom who's watching her 2 kids go through it, I find a lot of power in being a parent who affirms this system.
I love that, and how you're just this season of being a parent, and how those stories, like just watching the way all this has evolved for you, and hearing the way that you speak about public education with such, which is passion. Part of what's, and I mean, I feel like this probably is a pivot to the larger conversation I know that we're both so stirred up about. Part of what's fascinating for me is that everybody I know who works in any of these spaces, okay, I don't know any of them who nobody's wealthy, nobody's making a lot of money,
Right.
nobody has influence, nobody has power, nobody has like access to power. And yet what I continue to hear, and I'm trying not to come in like with super hard hit here right out of the gate, but it kind of is what it is.
Just come on.
People that have all kinds of access to power, have all the money, all the political and organizational like weight behind them, who say the most horrible things about public education. The system is corrupting teachers, school administrators. It is the wildest thing to hear people who are in like the clear majority in so many spaces talking about people that do this overwhelming work with, such little resources, as if that's,
right.
What do you do with that?
And it goes to me to such deep levels of privilege that you have that kind of access, that you can create these spaces that, are little social enclaves in private schools. And not that there's anything against sending your children to a private school. Sometimes it's the best option for families. And it's just, for me in this place time, so much of it personally embodies how far I've come in my faith journey. And I also find that it hits deeply on these like professional levels, where all of my professional work seems to culminate in this moment and helping people navigate this moment. The age that we're in is a culmination of these seemingly disparate threads, but they all really do come together under one ecosystem of misinformation umbrella. I mean, look at book bans, anti-science curriculum. I mean, I grew up in these parochial schools not learning any science.
Sure.
And actively hearing hostility towards scientists.
Yeah.
I mean, the anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, the purity culture, the punitive, harsh deity kind of hovering over all of us. I mean, there were kids getting spankings in my school.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean,
good grief.
Christian nationalism. I had Christian I'm hearing a lot about Christian nationalism now, and I'm like, girls, there's nothing new about this. I was getting Christian nationalism in an IV in my private school back in the day. And now you're seeing all this information about vouchers and people really coming out hard for vouchers. And it's divisive.
Yeah.
And that's the point. And if you look at who's funding it and you look at who's orchestrating it, who's disseminating all the talking points to get everybody on message to say the same thing, and local elections across the nation, there are a lot of shadowy, very well-resourced interests propping this messaging up and ensuring that these lights of collective consciousness don't come on and stay on.
Wait, Lauren, are you saying those folks are not a small persecuted minority? Is that what you're saying?
They might feel that way. And they may put that in the bullet points that they share with the massive media buy that they have, that they're able to penetrate TV stations, social media. I mean, it's fascinating because as a person who doesn't have a lot of resources, if I wanted to get my talking points out to everybody and enact massive social change, probably couldn't do it as easily as they could. So the persecuted minority aspect is...
With the most watched cable news, the most everything, the most clicks, the most likes, the most, like any category in which there's the most billionaires. Like, it's just kind of, do you know, Lauren, I don't know if how much we talked about this, how like in the last couple years, because for a long time, so our kids were part of a Christian school where Nicole's family just had like roots, and I mean, it was just kind of, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, garden variety sort of private Christian school, like in a lot of ways. The shift there has been so hard, and I wouldn't say these things out loud if they didn't all talk about this very publicly. But the
Mm.
shift there was so hard that I mean, we were functionally kicked out as a family because our when Kingston, our youngest, was trying to get in, um, they didn't let him in because of our views. They had adapted like a code of beliefs, not just for the students, but if the parents don't sign, and it's basically like, well, we've seen your social media, and we know that you're not there on these things. That was number one. And
Wow.
then the worst thing, because Caitlin, our old, and she's been very public about this, and even we've had this conversation on the podcast. She was very brave, wanted to share this, but she had an experience of sexual
Mm.
assault there that they just did not take seriously, even when we had to take legal just didn't take it seriously. While at the same time, of course, the constant screeds about morality, sexuality, like all of the things. But I mean, my Nicole was literally called in the office because of the Black Lives Matter sticker on her car. They were like, other parents are uncomfortable with this. I mean, it's like at that level.
Wow.
But yet again, with the level of bullying and intimidation, that these are the folks around the world that constantly are talking about being the bullied and intimidated. I guess it just gave
Right.
you a whole different window in terms of just what that really looks like right
I'm
now.
so sorry that your baby had that experience. I similarly had these frequent violent interactions in my parochial school upbringing
Mm.
where I was called the N word. I witnessed,
Oof.
people being abused. I witnessed discrimination against a disabled student. And that kind of stuff is not subject to the checks and balances that a public school would be.
Yeah.
And so they're able to foster these dynamics without any accountability. Public schools have to create space for disabled kids. They have
Mm.
to go through these procedural sort of things where, if they don't, they could get in big trouble.
Sure.
And so, in that way, the equity of it is at risk the more privatization comes up and is
Mm.
fueled as this ethic of the future of public schools.
Was there a particular moment, Lauren, in that when you talk about some of those kind of traumatic experiences you had of like breaking open, of like where the dissonance was kind of like, wait a second, or was it because I know, like for any of us, when you're brought up in a certain kind of system, you're trained to see a different kind of way. Like where did the crack sort of start for you of kind of like, wait, what's really happening here?
That's such a good question. I credit Chester Bennington from Lincoln Park so much with
Wow.
helping me tap into my rage as a youth. Rest in peace, Chester.
Mm.
I will always go back to those moments and just, even though I didn't know why I was angry, I felt this rage and I felt
Mm.
the contradiction of it. And I felt the colorism. I felt, my light skin and hair texture being prioritized over other Black girls in
Mm.
this environment. I felt, that sense of I'm not really safe. I'm not really appreciated on the levels that I feel like I could be. What is happening here? And what is it? What is this thing that I feel? I thought
Mm.
it was because I was Pentecostal
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
everybody else was, more frozen chosen.
Yeah.
That was not at all helping. Being Pentecostal did not help at
Yeah.
all. I still have my tambourine. That's not going anywhere.
That's amazing.
But yeah, I did definitely start to feel those tinges of anger and frustration. And I didn't understand it fully in its context until like
Mm.
late 20s. And by then it had gotten so heavy and so unwieldy that I just needed a fresh start. That's when we moved. We left the city that we grew up in and we had to start over.
Lauren, I have to say, and I feel like this is the most preachy thing I've said in a minute in the conversation, but it was so interesting when you said that you thought it was because you were Pentecostal. Because the thing about you, my observation, again, not that I claim to like know anything, is that it's one thing to be culturally Pentecostal in the ways that cultural Pentecostalism now can often look like, being a Southern Baptist who also speaks in tongues.
Sure.
But my sense for you is that you were so really Pentecostal, like you were such a true mystic. There was such a real connection to spirit. I think there probably was some truth to that in terms of like, just not in the way that you thought, in terms of when you have that sense of connection to spirit, then when things around you are not right, and there is this real way that I think it's kind of like God sort of says, yeah, you're not going to be like okay with this. So maybe in a strange way, it kind of was.
And the
that
more
wasn't the mix.
I think about it, the more I'm like, wow, these Episcopalians I'm hanging out with now really better look out.
Yeah. Because you can't put out that fire. I know. This is the same. Me too. In mainline church world, it's like always like, sorry, not sorry. I don't really know how to contain any of that, So
yeah. And if I see a tambourine just lying around, I'm gonna play it.
A Jericho march could happen at any time. Yeah.
Literally. What if it starts popping up? I'm ready.
You and me both. We
Right?
might start it.
We
We
are
might
ready.
just start one. So
Exactly.
So it really is interesting, Lauren, because I feel like we don't, I don't know. We're across many states. I'm in 2 states. But no more than we get to talk, it's always actually eerie to me the way I always feel. It's like, oh, what? Okay, Holy Spirit, in ways that just feel like it's just kind of mind blowing. Because I've thought casually forever, oh, I'd love to have a conversation with Lauren sometimes about like stuff. But a couple weeks ago, there really was this sense of like, oh, I feel like because I am out here doing all the things, it's a whole hustle in a way that I'm not used to, but it feels like just because I feel like I have to be doing it. And with that, one of the first people I thought of was like, I think I'm really supposed to talk to Lauren. I texted you about this. And then kind of out of the blue, you text me on Saturday like, hey, I think we need to talk about disinformation. And it was like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
And then, and even for me, kind of like I feel like it actually does need to be a bit of a revival that is against disinformation. But where does that come from for you in terms of like just the fire that you're feeling right now around all of this?
And you said revival knowing that was going to hit the deepest chord in me, because I think of revival in terms of a resurgence of some energy that's been trying to come out. It's not that it's been, somewhere off hiding or, not doing its job. It's been, like trying to break something down for so long. And, I think about revival right now as we have an anti-Christian nationalism pledge at TEP that a lot of people are sharing, discussing, signing on to, church pianists, people who no longer go to church, but who are very active in church, people who are tired of politics as usual, saying, you know what, it doesn't have to look like this anymore. And currently at the Expectations Project, we are doing this campaign called Dig Deeper, in which we resource folks who are trying to faithfully engage with the tools that they need to do that. So much of this for me comes back to times I've spent with you, hearing you say repeatedly, you don't have to check your brain at the door to be a Christian. Direct quote from you. That is so powerful to me every day when I think about, man, the privilege of not knowing, the privilege of being uncertain, the privilege of having mystery isn't afforded to so many people. They are locked into these ideas that are fueling not only the interests of those powerfully oppressing them, but actively undercutting their health and well-being.
Yeah.
And so I encourage people to check out expectations.org/digdeeper. There is a voter guide on child thriving that helps you really navigate through the propaganda and figure out these tangible aspects of voting that really align with the real world that people are experiencing across the nation. And there's some great webinars. Cami King developed these materials. She is a brilliant former educator and minister. She's a Black woman, and she is prolific. And I am so happy to be supporting her in this work, providing support where I can, and sharing it here with you and your people. And so, yeah, I think one of the things that has really hit home for me the most is the tangibility of misinformation, and how even in Appalachia right now, we're seeing
that's right.
People are holding up rifles to FEMA employees because of the misinformation that they've gotten. It can get deadly. It can get really costly.
Yeah.
And that's not just costly to the FEMA employee, that's costly to the person who needs the aid.
That's right.
They're cutting off their own survival. And so, yeah, I think that this is really starting to hit home, especially as I think about my mother's passing earlier this year. I mean, you knew my mom.
Oh, unbelievable soul. Oh my gosh, a beautiful person.
Yeah. And I've been starting to really put the pieces together and think about how it's possible that misinformation contributed to a really unfortunate and tragic health outcome for her. She suffered what they called a widowmaker heart attack earlier this year in May. And the way she fought so hard. She was just 70 years old, super healthy person, loved to walk, was everywhere, taking walks. And it brings up for me the tangibility of grief. I mean, grieving a mother is unlike anything else. Like, I've had moments of grief before, and you get respites from those kinds of moments of grief, but grieving a mother feels just like this ever-present reality now that I'm in. Like, I'm molecularly different now. Especially losing her so abruptly, it kind of felt like how I imagine like the dinosaurs felt when the meteor hit. It's like, whoa, no time to react, no time to hide, no time to get it together. Now everything is just flooded, covered. It's, completely different. Life looks different now. So, and if it wasn't for my spouse, if it wasn't for, my faith community in St. Ambrose Episcopal Church here in Raleigh, where I've been a part of that community for 5 years now, and Father Taylor, who came to the hospital and sat with us and prayed with us, and, just that real demonstration of presentness of God. He brought that. People in the hospital who were just amazing. I even mentioned one of them was named Jonathan, which felt like a real little touch. And Jonathan was the nurse who was with her in her last moments. My workplace, Sakia, my friends. I mean, I shudder to think about what my life would look like if I didn't have that right now, having to deal with this. But, I credit her with my spiritual formation, my civic formation, and my ethic. And she was my first universe that I lived in. So, yeah, I guess I can say I do think that there was a specific misinformation incident that triggered her health crisis. And it only really makes sense in the context of her life, like her, like who she was, that she would have this level of reaction to misinformation.
Yeah.
That it would disrupt her well-being physically to this extent. And so, Mom grew up in a really small Texas town. Both her parents were primarily minimum wage earners, and, Mom was brilliant and scrappy, and she rose above her station of birth and ended up working for global investment banking institutions and just international powerhouse banker people were, you know, her day to day in her work. Like she was coming from this rural environment, came kind of all the way to like this Wall Street level, you know, emphasis in her career. And throughout that she really remained passionate about the intersection of faith and politics. I mean, she primarily leaned conservative, and she held the tension where she didn't understand. She wasn't one to just outright reject ideas contrary to hers. She would allow you to kind of talk through it. She wanted to hear you out. And mostly she wanted to maintain the relationship. And so she was always interested in remaining close to those who she disagreed with. And mom was also white passing. She was born to two Black parents, but her skin was really light. And so she had access to certain spaces and acceptance in certain spaces. And that also contributed to what I believe contributed to her trajectory, her fast trajectory into professionalism, white collar professional spaces. And one of the main sources of tension that she and I started to have was when she got really hooked into alt media and like WikiLeaks and theories surrounding alt media. She just got into a space of, again, rage that I had felt in my burgeoning consciousness, but it was not rage that she could really channel constructively. And so, you know, she was kind of disappointed in herself for having been patriotic, formerly, you know, really into, yay, go USA, child of two veterans, having all of this sort of deep love for the United States, and then seeing, you know, the other side, some of it true, some of it fabricated, really started to radicalize her. And she would talk about it all the time. I couldn't understand why she could never like just let it go, but she would bounce some things off of me periodically, but usually it was just sort of like, I'm already mad, I just need you to know why. And then once the Epstein stuff started to surface, she was just never the same after that. Like she was really disillusioned, and she got really concerned about kids that she felt, you know, were at risk of being trafficked, and how the media, mainstream outlets, she couldn't find them, you know, holding people accountable. She didn't see where there was like justice happening. And so she started to just get really mad. And, you know, over the years, we'd had conversations about protesting and civic engagement and systems, which can be very hard for evangelical Christians to kind of leave the space of, well, we just need to feed people in soup kitchens,
right,
to go over to that space of, you know, let's disrupt, let's be people who intervene and change. And so those conversations that she would always be kind of interested in, but she had never like really gotten off the sidelines and like gone to, you know, a protest or started the work of systems change. And she just was still kind of in that let's be the hands and feet of Jesus type space. And so really earlier this year, towards the end of February, early March, I started to notice something just wasn't right. Something just was not right with her. And she was so rattled, and she was trying to explain stuff to me, but then she would just like, no. And she had made a lot of progress on becoming a welcoming person to members of the LGBTQ community. She really wanted to be, she wanted to be on the right side. And so there was this protest. I don't even know what they were protesting, but there was this like hands off our kids movement. And she heard it from one of her favorite ministers on YouTube. And she said, hey, I'm to herself. This is what I'm assuming she said, hey, to herself, I'm going to, get off the sidelines. I'm going to get involved and I care about this. And so the Hands Off Our Kids movement was speaking to her in that space of, I want justice for these trafficked children. And she went to the state capitol and she met a bunch of other elderly ladies who looked just like her. They were gray-haired, had grandchildren, were trying to do something. And then there was this quote-unquote counter-protest that she described to me. And I was just so bewildered as it started to come out because she started to cry when she was explaining to me what she'd seen. She said that there were people playing like Disney music, holding up signs saying, give us your kids. And, they had on like flag regalia and looked like, they were representing the LGBTQ community. And she believed it. And she believed it because I think those people were paid actors who showed up to this demonstration in which there were no policy recommendations being made. There was no mandate. There was no specificity. And there was nothing grounding this rally in real civic engagement. It was just, let's pray against this. And when she saw that, she saw those counter protesters, she spiraled and she started to worry that it wasn't all going to be okay, that there were people out here in the open able to say horrendous things about children, that she was wrong to try to be an affirming person. And she had suppressed all of this until finally she and I got together and I was able to talk to her one-on-one and say, Mom, what's going on? So when she told me all of this, I tried to course correct her and say, let's look into these people. Let's see who's funding them. Let's see, what their mission is and what's really going on here. And let's find out, the substance of this, because I'm concerned that this isn't legit. And, we talked through it. She seemed relieved to have gotten it off of her chest. And I said, okay, we're going to keep having this conversation. I am so glad that you're ready to start, the civic engagement part of your life.
Yeah.
I support that. Let's get you plugged into some people you feel good about. But the toll that it took on her, I think her fight or flight response was so activated and so heightened. And she was holding so much in her body. 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, she ends up going to the hospital for this massive cardiac event. 10 days later, she passes away after putting up a really good fight. And so going through this work with the Expectations Project, I see the stakes are just so high for especially our elders and those of us trying to hold on to them and not allow them to be lost to these algorithmic machines.
Yeah.
And so, I feel very called to help in this way.
Lauren, I'm so, and trying not to burst in tears. I'm so I just feel the gravity of this story and the way to, the sacredness of you being willing to share it and to, and it's hit me on so many different levels because it's like I feel a lot of rage right now. I think a lot of us do at the lies and the misinformation, but that in the midst of that, the tyranny that it holds over people that we love, where they're victimized by it, you know, and that
Right.
it's just and kind of and terrorized by it because I'm thinking like your mom. I mean, she just oozed tenderness in every way, just a tender person, just an earnest, sincere. And the idea that then like she's thinking that there's this cabal and now there's like gay people are right here out in the open in Disney costumes saying they want to kidnap your kids. And then,
Right.
gosh, it's so wild. Is that a thing, by the way, that happens regularly, that there'll be like at protests, something like that, where you're attempting to paint people as like, is this a thing that,
I was adamant to find out. And when I was doing the research, I did see where there were all these like templated different counter protests popping up at these things. And I was just shocked at the level of depravity.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe somebody had gone through the trouble of inventing this.
Yeah.
I could not. If I hadn't been watching X-Files, I don't think I would have believed it. X-Files has helped me so much to understand that there's scale to these things that you can't you can't imagine. And so
that the truth
even
is out there, that there is a cigarette smoking man. It's weird that we're talking about conspiracies, and yet there's a very weird way. It's like, yeah, there's truth to it, but just not in the way that you think.
Right. It's just a twist. And it's, you know, I have started to really question on fundamental levels what would cause the investment. Why would an entity go through so much trouble to set this stage for people? And you know, it all comes back to dividing and controlling, and it all comes back to, you know, our economy is based on division and control of labor, division and control of gender and race and class. And so because some people, you know, have these prisons in their minds, they're now able to create real prisons in the real world for other people. And that is their privilege and their resource to do that.
Yeah.
And there isn't really a motivation about the mystery. There isn't, you know, I mean, a mystery about the motivation when you think about it in that light. It's producing the desired outcome.
Yeah.
It's giving you the result it's designed to give you. The question then becomes for us, you know, people who are resisting, how do we form relationships and communities that can outrun this, outlive this, survive this, be creative in the face of this? How can we form relationships that withstand the tension that this kind of thing causes? It just means learning to deal with harms and abuses and grief in productive ways. It means you have to create space for this human range of emotion in productive ways. Because even if it wasn't a billionaire doing it right now, it would be, you know, the way the CIA and the FBI colluded to do it for Fred Hampton and Martin Luther King Jr. and creating vulnerabilities and movements that are intending to bring people together. It's in the fabric of what we are doing here in this country.
Yeah,
And
it's
so,
like, gosh, Lauren. Yeah, please keep going. No, I just like, and it's just like, so it's like, and what you said even about Fred Hampton and Martin Luther King, it's like, yeah, and those, by the way, are like, these are these are stories on record, really, for anybody's looking.
Right.
These are not conspiracy theories, and but that's what's so tricky. It's like there is a conspiracy, there is an
Right.
empire, there is a Babylon.
Right.
Like all these things are very true, but then when you think that your enemy is your neighbor, when you think, oh,
Right.
it's gay people, it's public
Right.
school teachers.
Right.
They're the ones who are in the cabal. They're the ones who are like doing evil. And Lauren, when you said this, even when you brought up about the work that you're doing with the Expectations Project and these, and by the way, I'm not just saying this. This is like from my belly. Part of what's happening, I think, even us connecting like this way, it's like I've got to be doing more with y'all, for y'all. Anything I do, just spread word, like whatever. I feel like
Yay.
I just desperately need constructive resources and directing people to the work. But what you said about algorithms, Lauren, tell me, I've been thinking about this probably every day for a couple weeks now. Don't you think there's something too? Because like, okay, even when we described how this conversation came to be and these different movements in our lives, what are we doing? Well, we're looking at, we see a sense of movement and orchestration of the spirit and confirmation in ways that I utterly buy into it. To go very X-Files, I want to believe. I want to believe in the mysteries. I want to believe in the things. It's like I'm all the way there. But I think there's this really sinister way that for people of faith, algorithms mimic what we think of as the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
I heard this, I saw that, and now, well, lo and behold, I'm seeing it everywhere. Everybody I know is talking about it, and it's like this really perverse, like simulation of the Holy Spirit for people. Do you think there's something to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it goes back to the ecosystems. I mean, all algorithms had to do was mimic the divisions that were taking place in real life.
Yeah.
The divisions that we had constructed to maintain our think tanks of white supremacy and capitalist patriarchy and heteronormativity. All it had to do was copy and paste those structures into the digital world. So to where you really have a hard time interacting with somebody different from you because the confirmation bias is so strong.
Right.
I mean, you just want to feel right. And it feels so good to be right. That sitting with the tension and sitting with the discomfort of being wrong is unbearable and costly. I think often about how when my mom was talking about WikiLeaks and talking about this stuff, she felt like she was so alone. And no one understood. And it was so vile and so hard. And it led her to feeling as though only these political outsiders, only these people who weren't in, the current legislative soup were capable of righting these wrongs. And it forced her to think in ways that were so counterproductive to her own well-being, because she felt like this can't continue. This has to burn down at all costs, whatever it takes. And so, I absolutely think that these ways in which people are looking at algorithms for confirmation bias feel just as good, are tickling the same areas as the Holy Spirit does when we see affirmation from God.
Lauren, I've talked about it, but I've talked about it rarely. And now I feel like this language has almost become shorthand for me to where I don't talk about where it comes from. Do you know, it was when it was somewhere around 2007, 2008. I was doing my THM at Duke, and I read Toni Morrison's novel, The Bluest Eye. And there's a passage towards the end of that book that is just, it's so haunting. I never go a week without thinking of it, but it describes the destruction of this character in the novel, Piccola, but it uses the Isaiah 53 language and it imposes it on her in terms of what everybody else is doing to her. It's like they're bruised for their iniquities, but the way it describes her in the language of that messianic prophecy is the way that she's scarred, the way that everybody puts their projections. It was like, once I saw that in that novel, it was the first time it clicked for me of like, oh, it's a simulation of righteousness. It literally, it's like,
Mm.
I feel, and it's not that people are evil, but there is a way that we feel clean if we can put all of that off onto somebody else. There's a way that that feels sanctifying. And it's part of why I think some of what's happening in the world right now in these spaces is uniquely dangerous because of its proximity to real power. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
I believe in the Christ, I believe in Jesus, I believe in these things. But when you appropriate that language, and all the more ironic when he's the one crucified outside the gates, and all the things that means.
Mm.
But then you place that onto somebody else. There is a spiritual power to it, but that's not in the way that people think. And so it just strikes me that's part of why it seems to me that these lies have such power, is that they weirdly are just enough either in proximity to truth, or at least the language of the truth, that it makes it that much more deadly somehow.
And isn't it so indicative of where we are that the bluest eye is on banned book lists?
Yeah. Oh,
Books
Lord.
like that really help people
Yeah.
come to consciousness, that turn the lights on. Where else are we supposed to go?
Yeah.
If the algorithms can be manipulated with money and everything around you shut down because you don't have the resources to fight it, Toni Morrison not being at your library feels like life and death.
Yeah.
At that point, the difference between, do you decide to form these relationships outside of your little echo chamber, or do you, stick with what feels safe?
Yeah.
Those are the outlets that people are attacking. And this is the thing, too, that I want to bring home so much for people who have deconstructed and have gone through this, is that any faith, any ideology, any philosophy can be weaponized. And nobody is safe from this.
Yeah.
Just because it's a certain group of people right now doesn't mean that it can't be another.
That's right.
If they can do this with Christianity, with Jesus, they can do it with anything.
That's right. Lauren, I just had this conversation with my friend Brian, this particular thing, because this also, again, I've seen it, but I feel like I'm just trying to put some language around it. This idea that sometimes I wonder if people who have deconstructed, as much as I believe there's toxic things to be deconstructed from, can be weirdly in the most danger in this way, because it's almost like if you get out from under toxic ideology, but then you don't have any scaffolding, it almost seems like those are the folks who are the most ripe for the deepest kind of disinformation. I'm seeing it almost like as a pipeline right now, that some of those folks who escaped out from under ideas that I legitimately would celebrate, oh, that's great. But now I feel like are embracing the worst of the worst, precisely because it's like without any other practices, without any other kind of community, then you get drawn back to that same thing, but you just don't recognize it's coming in a different form.
Right. And you still have the need. You still have the gaping hole.
Yes.
So what do I fill it with now? Who do I talk to now? Who's safe now?
Yeah.
And there are so many predatory folks waiting in the wings to get to us at that very vulnerable place.
Yeah.
Because we haven't learned how to grieve.
Yeah.
Because we haven't learned how to deal with harm. We haven't learned how to sit with discomfort. Adrienne Marie Brown talks about this, and she talks about how there is this delay in changing society because people are afraid to grieve what we currently have.
Yeah.
People are afraid to allow it to die because they don't have the imagination to replace it, and also they don't have the muscle of grief to work through the change management of it. And I think about how we are not allowed to really grieve as Christians.
Yes.
Grief is so taboo. Our feelings aren't always welcome. It's a hard time. It's a hard time to not be able to talk about how you feel.
Yeah. How do you, and even speaking about how we talk about the way we feel, and I want to honor your time, Lauren, but I'm not just saying this. I've said many times, this conversation is this conversation is that. I have no doubt this is the most important conversation I've had on this podcast. So I'm going to be doing, I would go door to door to get people to listen to this right now. Like, how do you personally, when you've seen like both because I got to think it's got to be a different level of rage, but a different kind of grief, because you see like your mom is kind of a victim of this kind of thing, and then people like, how do you steward all of that emotion in ways that, I mean, because you are doing this good work and you're on the front lines and you're not like stopping. Like, how do you manage the complexity of anger and pain and sadness? Like, what does that even look like for you?
That's such a good question. Um, I have a stack of books right here on my desk, and I could just rattle off the names of them.
Mm,
Because particularly this one. I mean, and I keep it at arm's length because
yeah.
I love it. I
Yeah.
mean, Cole Arthur Riley and Black Liturgies, we're actually reading this together as a team at the Expectations
Mm,
Project right now. Um, I am learning new spiritual practices all the time to help ground. There's one called Centering Prayer, which I really like. There's one in which I also recently introduced this to the team called Group Lectio, which
mm,
allows us to kind of talk through these hard topics without trying to overly mentally diagnose,
yeah.
but kind of allowing the human space to to flourish and come out. And then I have so much wealth in Black liberation theology through my
Mm,
faith community. I feel like I am uniquely resourced to. I feel like I'm uniquely resourced to go through a journey like this and remain whole and
mm,
maintain my integrity.
mm,
I definitely don't think that it is an accident that it's here and now,
yeah.
because I have what I need here and
Yeah.
now.
Mm. That's so beautiful. And I tell you, as someone who obviously I don't in a weird way aspire to like I'm on the inside of this, but at this point feel so thoroughly discipled by the Black church. And part of the reason it's not some novelty or whatever for me. This is what I go to over and over again. Even these things about like room for lament and weeping and grief and
Mm-hmm.
joy. These things that are fundamentally human, integrating the whole of human experience. I don't know where else you go. I don't know who else
Right.
will teach
Who
you
else is
this.
doing
If I
it?
knew where else
Right.
to get it, great. But I have found consistently the only source, more or less, to be the Black church in America. Like, this is the storehouse for, like, if you want a wholly integrated, lament, weeping, joy, like all that, all these things that are fundamentally human without minimizing anybody else's particularity. I just don't know where else you get that sound where it all is like full volume, in that way. I just don't know where else it exists. So I just love, because I like the Black liturgy stuff is just, is
So good.
oh, I just think it's life saving for so many of us right now. Lauren, what would you say for other folks who are navigating these kind of relationships with folks, and trying to figure it out, because and understanding that in a way everybody is still an ongoing process of disentanglement. This every
Mm.
day we're hit with new information, and what am I going to do with this, and how do I know, how do I recognize fact from fiction? What would you say to folks who are in those relationships right now with people that they love, but trying both to be like discerning, but then you don't want to be heavy handed or like preachy? Like, what would you say to folks who are trying to navigate those kinds of relationships right now?
Oh, that's tough. I mean, I definitely had support through therapists. I've had support from my spouse. I've had support from friends who are compassionate.
Hmm.
I have journaled a lot through it. I mean, you have to create the space for your own humanity and really dealing with it. I mean, there'll be times where it may be just too much, and you
Yeah.
have to, you know, say, okay, I need a boundary here. I mean, I definitely think that people have to navigate it in ways that their physical bodies, their spirits, emotional, are consenting to at
Yeah.
any given point. I mean,
Yeah.
consent is extremely important, because if it doesn't feel like you are safe in the space, safe in the environment, then it's not good work. And so you have this mandate to hear your own humanness within it
Mm.
to keep you in check, really. Otherwise, you can feel like, oh, I just have to hold on. I have to, at your own expense, which I don't believe that that's helpful.
Mm.
So there's a lot of inner soul, deep checking to do as you go through it with loved ones.
That's so good, Lauren, and it's so helpful because it's like it's. I said some things playfully in my conversation with Brian, and even a few people pushed back, kind of like because we were kind of almost joking about the kind of like the ways that especially when I'm talking to another pastor who's like a white guy, it's like, okay, they is us. I'm a 6'5" white guy. Some people are like, so when I hear these things, kind of like, well, how can you say these things to us as like a white evangelicals? Like, how can I say these things? Because like, look at, I mean, hello, like this is my world, this is my family in a way that I feel like you can talk about. But I just,
Yeah.
Lauren, it's just I cannot thank you enough for. I feel like what you're doing is such holy work, and I'm thinking about, and I don't want that to sound like hokey or something, but I know, and even being in an Episcopal church now, and then I know the value there of the communion of the saints and how seriously we take this idea of this like cloud of witnesses, and your mom being this really extraordinary person who mattered a lot to me, and I know she mattered to so many people. I'm just I can't help but like really feel like tangibly feel in a conversation like this, like just how much you're an extension of her, and even telling this vulnerable story, how much it honors her and honors her bravery and courage. It's like she made this possible, and this very real sense of, yeah, like she's in the cloud of witnesses rooting you on in this. And it's just so powerful how much I feel even like something of that presence, of that spirit that was in her, in you, and in this conversation. It's the same tenderness. And that's the thing that makes it so tragic too, of course, is that tenderness that broke her open in this way. But just the goodness that was in her, that's in you, Lauren. It's really staggering. And I'm just so thankful for this,
Well,
for this
I couldn't
gift.
do this with anybody else. So if it was going to happen, it was going to happen this way.
It's a very niche conversation.
It's super niche.
And a very niche thing that we're doing in general, I think, with our lives now, isn't it?
Yeah. Wild that we are here.
Don't you love, I gotta keep railing about this, but I just have too much fun. Don't you just love, Lauren, the folks that are kind of like, yeah, like they sold out to the culture to get like rich and famous. It's like, wow. Man.
Where is my sellout check?
That's right. Where do we cash this in? Okay, because we started with joy, and I feel like you're such a joyful presence, even in as talking about the heavy things of like grief. Whatever. I have to ask you this, because another niche conversation I'm very rarely able to have. What's your favorite episode of the X-Files?
Oh my God. Okay, so X-Files. Okay, first of all, I started watching X-Files like a year and a half ago.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know it was that recent.
Oh, it was that recent. Well,
because it discipled me too.
Yes, I knew that. And so I was like, okay, I just need something to get into. It was on Prime Video for free. And so then there was this one episode where the cigarette smoking man, and I forget which one it is, he talks about his affinity for Dr. King, even though he was tasked with his assassination. And I was like, what?
Wow.
What? The whole show is really such a great juxtaposition between, these archetypes, and you're feeling like, oh, who am I this time? Am I Scully? Am I Mulder?
Yeah.
Do I believe? Do I not? But then it just gives you this sense of, none of us knows what we're doing. We're all up against this machine.
Yeah.
So it's so good.
It's really profound. That one stands out. And I love that landing it there, because it doesn't even feel silly. It's like, in very real ways we couldn't have anticipated. And I do think there was a lot of things about the shows that was prophetic, starting in the early 90s. That kind of like, we are seeing the world unfold this way. I love the show, which also just concluded, but Evil channels a lot of this, where you've got like a priest and a non-believer. But I feel like ultimately you come to the same thing in terms of like the forces of evil are seen the same way, and this idea that we do have a role in this cosmic drama. And is that fundamentally like what Pentecostalism is largely about? Like, yeah, we actually do have a role to play in this.
Like, we're in this story. This is about us.
That's right. That's right. I love it, Lauren. This is one of my favorite conversations I've ever had. I cannot thank you enough for it, and just for the sacred gift of your story and your witness. I want to go in a corner and cry, and I also want to go charge the gates of hell with a water pistol right now, simultaneously, based on this time. So, like,
love that analogy.
It's all happening at once. One more time, how should do you want to direct people to want to know more about what's happening with the Expectations Project and the work you're doing there? Because I want people to like drink it up and write checks and all the things. So
please visit expectations.org/dig deeper. That's our campaign. Also, we have a pledge running all the way through the election about resisting Christian nationalism. You can sign your name to that and get more information to come in the weeks and months to follow, and how to stay in shape for resisting Christian nationalism.
Brilliant. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. What an amazing, remarkable just time this has been. So grateful for you. So good. We'll do this again soon for sure.
Yes.
Take care, friends.